Hey everyone, and welcome back to my channel Experiencing the City, where I explore the sights, sounds, tastes, feels, and smells of different places around the world. Today, let's take a deep dive into one of my favorite cities in the United States, Boston, Massachusetts.
So Boston is the closest thing I find to experiencing the United Kingdom and Ireland while being in the United States. The cobbled streets, the gaslit lanterns of Beacon Hill, the Dickensian bay windows of North End, the winding and rather nonsensical street patterns of downtown. But this list could truly go on for pages, and there's a great deal of sense to this because, of course, Boston is one of the United States' oldest cities, and it shares a great deal of influence from its English and Irish settlers of centuries past. So my time in Boston in March of 2021 was brief. It was only a few days, but I made every effort to soak in as much of the ambience and character of the city as I possibly could. And, this was actually my first truly solo trip, although one could argue that much of my time in London and Dublin would qualify as solo traveling. But, with that said, I really was afforded the ability to just sit and soak in everything around me. The smells, the sounds, the way the air felt on my skin, the tastes, and of course, the sights. From the air, one might imagine that Boston kind of looks like any other major U.S. city. You see a collection of skyscrapers and what one would presume to be the downtown. You see a large river with multiple highway bridges. You see pretty forested suburbs as far as the eye can see. But on the ground, you'll find that while this is true on kind of a grand level, Boston is quite distinctive in its look. Even from the air, you still could sense kind of that New Englandness of the place. And despite kind of its pattern from above, downtown, the suburbs, it still felt old and wise. And this is how I always describe Boston. It's very much lived in. So downtown does have a pretty concentrated skyscraper district, and there are certainly areas on the street level that could pass for some of the calmer, areas of Manhattan. But even in Boston's most commercial, branded downtown quarters, there's a distinguished difference from Manhattan. For one, Boston was founded before cars were invented and before street grid systems were the blueprint for American cities. And so in a very European fashion, Boston's streets are just a hodgepodge of urban, canals with no rhyme or reason. And I quite like this. And sprinkled with centuries-old historic sites like the old Massachusetts State House, which was the home of the Boston Massacre. Cemeteries with headstones dating as far back as the 1600s, hidden little alleyways with cool shops. So as you kind of get outside of downtown proper, the skyscraper district, the whole perception of suburbs surrounding downtown really quickly fades because you get North End, for example, sitting right on the edge of the harbor, and that could have sprung straight from the pages of Charles Dickens' novel. You've got dense brick buildings, cobbled streets, British-looking storefronts. You've got the Paul Revere House. So they all create a very real, are we still in the United States at all kind of ambience. It's old, it's gritty, it's lived in, it's beautiful. And it includes Little Italy. So a lot of really cool Italian restaurants, markets, shops, things like that. So next to the Boston Common is Beacon Hill. I am speaking it into existence. I will live in Beacon Hill one day. This is a gorgeous, just hilly neighborhood next to the Boston Common, which is a gorgeous and hilly park right in the middle of the city, and it is about as picturesque as you can get. You're looking at cobbled streets, 3 and 4 story, row houses, gaslit lanterns, tree-lined sidewalks that really just kind of transport you across the ocean to a rainy London neighborhood. It's truly perfect. Living in Washington, D.C., and having taken subways of both London and New York City at the time of that visit, I had a pretty decent expectation at the time of what public transit was meant to be. So we'll talk a little bit about the T. The T essentially met that expectation, but I did notice a few things that were interesting. For one, the trains were old. I'm talking wood paneled interiors old. The Green Line in downtown even had what I perceived to be literal buses in lieu of trains underground. And so you compare that to the very shiny metro systems in DC and in London. This was a bit shocking. But I also found it quite charming. It really added to that ambience and character of both grit and kind of that sage wisdom that Boston seems to emit. Boston's kind of grit can be felt in other parts of the town as well. So the area near Fenway Park is quite industrial. So you've got a lot of graffiti, metal garage doors, and buildings, good deal of rust. And I don't see this as a bad thing, I should add. I never felt unsafe walking through this area of town. It just added to the kind of layered dynamic of the city. And then, of course, you get across the Charles River into Cambridge. Things are very different yet again. And this was kind of in a way I didn't really expect, because you've got wooden siding houses and pretty tight alleyways and power lines. And I don't know why, but it reminded me a lot of Ohio, or just the neighborhood from A Christmas Story, and that was Indiana. So it kind of gave me this sense of familiarity and nostalgia, even though I had never lived there. Walking the sidewalks made me feel instantly comfortable. It felt like I was home. So on the sounds of Boston, Boston is compact, yeah. It's still a major city, and so it comes with the sounds that I've begun to find typical of major cities. So lots of traffic, honking, engines revving, tires against the pavement, sirens, airplanes from the nearing Logan International Airport. And of course, an added bonus for Boston is that you can hear the tea screeching beneath you through the metal grates. So altogether, Boston's kind of urban landscape can best be summed up with the old adage, hustle and bustle. And perhaps it's the nautical nature of Dublin and London that make Boston such an easy comparison. The seagulls and pelican cries are everywhere to be found. The ocean wind is gusty, and you can hear it. Somehow the sonic ambience would never really pass as tropical, though. Despite all the sounds of the ocean, there is something chillier about Boston's landscape. One thing that I absolutely loved about Dublin is that no matter how chilly the air was, or how Georgian and grimy the architecture and the streets were, you never forgot that you were in an ocean town. And in Boston, the same sensation applies, especially as you're near the harbor and the salt water is very present. You can smell that, it's really prominent. And I'm certain that in the summer months, the smell is more prominent, but even in March, that salty breeze was really just unmistakable. So, outside of the salty air, you get a blend of countless scents that caught my attention as I wandered about the city, and fresh caught seafood, probably lobster, right? Damp concrete, and then you also have the fresh water from the Charles River. So really just a lot of smells that came together at once. So in terms of the way Boston feels, Boston in March, according to my local friends who lived in Rhode Island, it can really be hit or miss on the weather. And this proved absolutely true during my time there. So over a matter of days, I experienced crisp, windy afternoons at 46 degrees, saw still frozen piles of snow from, a winter snowfall, and then I had to trudge my way to the Airbnb to change into shorts and a t-shirt because it was so hot. So it really did vary kind of back and forth. And it only rained one day when I was in town. Unfortunately, this was on the morning that I was exploring Cambridge, so it really added to the very British ambience of Harvard University. Different spots, of course, evoke different sensations. While on a little excursion to Revere Beach, the wind was stronger, sharper, wetter than anything I had felt while I was in the city. And similar to its more urban counterpart, Revere Beach gave me very similar sensations to the British Isles, particularly Streatham Beach, which was in Sligo, Ireland. Regarding the tastes of Boston, eating in Boston, even during my brief visit, was unlike eating anywhere else. Boston is serious about their seafood. So Luke's Lobster on Washington Street, little hole-in-the-wall spot downtown, precisely what I was looking for. There were maybe 2 tables here, and the fresh catches of the day were written in chalk above the counter. I ate there twice, both times opting for a simple Maine lobster roll, 6 ounces of cold lobster on a thick, buttery slice of bread, folded on a paper boat with Cape Cod chips. I've never tasted something so distinctively high quality. I mean, this lobster and the butter were almost too good for comfort. And for my wallet, I should add. And it fell apart in my hands both times I ate it. Like, that didn't stop me from ensuring that every single bite was accounted for. And there was Union Oyster Market. And that was decided upon by my 2 of my local friends, one from Rhode Island, one from Connecticut. So it was an unseasonably warm day for Boston when we ate here, so we ate outside. And it was here that I actually had my first ever clam chowder, which, it's a soup I don't think I'll ever forget. I mean, it tasted exactly as you would expect clam chowder to taste, seafood chowder. But it was rich, it was just dense, it was so heavy in the best possible way. You accompany that with Guinness and a very thick cornbread, and it was the warmest, just most homey meal I think I had in the city. And of course, seafood is only a piece of the puzzle in famous Boston cuisines that I had to hit. So after our lunch at Union Oyster Market, my local friends and I made the trip to North End, Little Italy, where I had my first of many cannolis from Mike's. So I am ridiculously and hopelessly in love with peanut butter. And when I walked into this open-air, cash-only storefront, my attention diverted to one thing and one thing only: peanut butter and chocolate cannoli. So this was like eating peanut butter pie out of a relatively soft ice cream cone, and then drizzled in chocolate syrup and powdered sugar. So only Chicago deep dish pizza has competed with the way that this filled me up. And yet, I made several visits to Mike's, because how could I not? And I had several lobster rolls, several cannoli, multiple clam chowders while I was there. And, I wasn't going to spend time in Boston without taking full advantage of all of these amazing foods. One thing that I didn't stick to as far as the New England brand is concerned was Dunkin'. And the thing is, yes, Dunkin' is a New England staple, but it's really broadened into kind of an American staple over the years, and their coffee just really isn't that great. And that said, I can't go without mentioning Cafe Nero, or Nero. And so this is a little chain that is one I've only ever seen in Boston, so I'm sure it's other places, but I've only seen it in Boston. And the coffee here is very much in line with the kind of espresso I tasted in England and Ireland, actually. So, and the desserts and the pastries were really light and really delicious. I know, like, the croissants were just really buttery, really flaky, so it was really good. And the best part of this little chain of cafes really is the ambience, because each one was decorated with these aged bookshelves filled with just hundreds of books, and it was really dimly lit. So you almost kind of got this sense that you were in an old English library having your coffee, So in terms of the overall ambience of Boston, how do I capture this city for you? So I've really come to enjoy the Homesick Candles brand, and they attempt to capture a city's scent in wax. And the thing about this company's rendition of Boston is that it doesn't so much capture the literal smell of Boston, unlike they do with some of the other cities, but they do capture the vibe of Boston, for lack of a better word. In that arena, they really are spot on. The candle's description is fall days spent wandering the cobblestone streets. Notes of spiced tea with clove and orange capture this city on a hill. And the fact is, this absolutely captures the ambience of Boston. Walking the winding streets, you get the sense that, yeah, you're in a very modern city, but you also feel the weight of Boston's history and the role it played in shaping what would become the United States. And there really is a tangible feeling of New England here that's really quite different from any other part of the country that I've been to. The buildings themselves seem to show kind of sageness and grit, and the city seems kind of casually aware of its significance. Like, there's this sense of familiarity and connection with the history of America's founding and cozy neighborhood streets, and they just evoke this general sense of comfort, you know? And with just enough lobster and Massachusetts accents and frigid air, to remind you that you're still somewhere quite far from